What's up, everyone? This is Dave Wisniewski with the Safer Dave Show with SaferArizona.com. I am here with nationally famous cannabis defense attorney Tom Dean. Hello, Mr. Tom Dean. How you doing tonight?
Hey, Dave. How you doing tonight? Good. Thanks for coming by.
Pretty great. We are here. We're going to be talking about a couple of great things tonight. One, I kind of want Tom to kind of go over his background, tell you, the viewers a little bit what he's all about, what he's been doing as the cannabis defense attorney, and then we're going to go over a few different details of what's going on here in the Arizona cannabis legalization movement. So kind of tell us about your background as a cannabis defense attorney.
I mean, and a lot of you probably know my background. I originally grew up in Ohio and South Florida, but I first was introduced to marijuana policy reform back in the 80s when I was in high school in the early 80s. Ohio NORML was very active and had some really good rallies that I happened to be lucky enough to attend one of them and was turned on to the whole idea of cannabis reform. You know, many of my friends in high school were involved in using cannabis and, which I found to be relatively harmless. Even back then, it was obvious to me that this wasn't anything dangerous, and certainly something far less dangerous than consuming alcohol.
Right.
And yet I found that on numerous occasions we were confronted by law enforcement and kind of shaken down and put up against the wall. And
so you were roughed up, growing up.
A lot. Me and my friends growing up on the east side of Cleveland. And so I kind of experienced the whole marijuana prohibition or drug war thing.
You ever arrested?
Firsthand. I was never arrested myself.
What was the penalty in Cleveland at the time?
Gosh, I don't know. All I knew back then was, it was bad. It was wrong and you could get busted for it. And it didn't seem right because I knew that it was a relatively harmless thing, even for people at that time who were, minors. Now, since then, I've adjusted my position. I don't believe that marijuana should be legal for minors to use. I actually agree and endorse NORML's policy of responsible marijuana use, which is that you should be at least 18 years old in order to legally use marijuana. Just like I think that you should be 18 to use alcohol, although across the country, as we know, it's 21. But then, going to college, more of sort of experience with lots of really intelligent, very creative, very successful individuals that were great students then and high achievers now, very successful people now in business, science, academics, medicine, law, who smoke marijuana on a regular basis. And the idea that they would be subject to criminal penalties or loss of their ability to contribute in their particular profession or vocation is outrageous to me, really. A guy a little bit older than me that I always look to and point to as an example of that is Carl Sagan, who was a daily marijuana user and attributed many of his insights and his breakthroughs to his use of cannabis, and unfortunately wasn't able to disclose that until he was much older, and actually really not really until he actually died, and his wife brought this information forward and became a member of NORML's board of directors for fear of loss of contracts with PBS and other grants and so forth. And this is the problem. This is the fear. It was stigmatized. And then going to law school, learning more about police misconduct and what our constitutional rights are really all about. Starting to practice in Flagstaff, Arizona back in the early 90s and representing individuals charged with marijuana crimes and seeing firsthand the actual real devastation. Students being kicked out of college, losing their financial aid,
Absolutely.
Children being taken away, houses being taken from their owners, people going to prison, put on probation, being subject to all kinds of crazy draconian penalties as a result of their nonviolent use of marijuana in a responsible way that I found to be, quite frankly,
disgusting.
Disgusting.
The war is real.
Human rights tragedy, and I think that this is a political issue, and I consider all people behind bars for marijuana crimes to be political prisoners. And I know a lot of people don't like to even use the word marijuana because it was utilized back at the beginning of Prohibition in an attempt to stigmatize the substance, the plant, and more properly referred to as cannabis.
So what kind of cases have you been representing over the last several years?
So I mean, really, there's no limit. I'm primarily a criminal defense lawyer. I've done a little bit of other types of law over the years, but in the last, it's been 22 years now that I've been practicing. But certainly, I became legal director at Normal in 1998. And that's when I really started focusing in specifically on marijuana-related cases. And not just criminal defense, but a lot of civil cases, a lot of cases, all kinds of federal cases, complaints with the FCC, the EPA, crazy stuff that you wouldn't even believe if I told you about it right now. But
so people who have been arrested for possession or sales.
Absolutely. Now my focus is on criminal defense, representing individuals who are being prosecuted with cultivation, what's referred to as production under Arizona law, sales, transportation, and possession of marijuana. And this is become extremely important since the passage of the Medical Marijuana Act, because we've got a lot of confusion amongst marijuana cannabis consumers who are maybe don't, and understandably so, don't understand exactly what the law is. And quite frankly, I argue to the court every day, I don't think that anybody can honestly understand what some of the provisions are. Is it legal for a patient to sell marijuana to another patient?
And so what we're seeing here is a lot of, confused, law police officers, and then the patients, they're confused about what the law is, and then they're breaking the law, and they're getting arrested, and you're sitting here defending them in court. And they're not criminals, they're patients,
right.
They're sick people.
I have people come into my office every week. I have multiple people come into my office to talk to me about, hey, I'm operating a delivery business, and I'm pretty sure that we're in compliance. I just want to make sure we're not missing any details. And then I have to deliver the bad news, which is, unfortunately, according to the Arizona Court of Appeals, what you're doing is completely illegal. And this is usually they're surprised to hear this. These are people who are genuinely confused. These aren't people who know it's illegal and they're out there intentionally breaking the law. I mean, these are people who are genuinely confused, number one. Number two, there's also a group of people who maybe do understand now that it's not legal, but what we're dealing with free markets here. We're dealing with a free society with free human beings, free Americans. And these individuals, when a substance becomes legal, are going to engage in certain conduct that we as human beings know is going to happen. Growing something that's been decriminalized, selling something that's been legalized. This is something that we have to expect to happen. And to pretend like that's not going to happen is burying your head in the sand. So to pass any law that partially, sort of legalizes, but in some technical ways doesn't really legalize it, but it's really hard to figure out which way, how, and why it's not, is unfair. Because we know human beings, and we know how we behave, and we have to accommodate human behavior when we pass these laws and
right.
these initiatives.
We need to be beings of compassion. So I know there's a lot of viewers out there that have had their own run-ins with the law, and they're seeking some legal advice. How can our viewers get a hold of you if they need some help?
Sure. You can reach me through my website, which unfortunately is terribly outdated, as you know, Dave. And that's ArizonaMarijuanaLaw.com. You can email me through there, ArizonaMarijuanaLaw.com. You can also call me directly at 602-635-4990, 602-635-4990, or shoot me an email at tdean@azpotlaw.com. The initial T, letter T, as in Tom, my last name, Dean, at azpotlaw.com.
All right, thank you very much. So we're going to move forward and talk about what's going on here in the state of Arizona. Right now, we have two big campaigns that are aiming to change marijuana laws in kind of different ways, but kind of similar ways. One is run by the Marijuana Policy Project, which is a national organization. I'm sure they're based out of Washington, D.C.
That's right.
And then they have their initiative. It's called the Campaign to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. And then competing is an initiative written primarily by Arizona citizens called Arizonans for Mindful Regulation, and you can see that at azfmr.com. And so there's a couple of big differences between the two initiatives, and the Marijuana Policy Project is very disliked by a lot of the patient community, for one, primarily because they gave us the 25-mile law, which, it was cool right away. People could grow their 12 plants with the AMMA, but that was only because there was no dispensaries around. And once dispensaries started popping up, it turned all these sick people, all these patients, into criminals. And so if they kept trying to heal themselves in the way that they were allowed to at first, they would go to jail. And it was very detrimental to a lot of patients, and we saw a lot of new cases coming out of this, and people were going down. Sick people, our friends, were going to prison when all they were trying to do is save their lives with non-toxic medicinal flower buds. So what's going on here is we have a few different categories where we like to compare the two initiatives. And Tom Dean, being a defense attorney, has a legal opinion, and he kind of wants to go over a few things that we think are important for the viewer to hear. And so starting off, when we compare the two initiatives, we're talking about the amounts. Now, both of them are the AZFMR and the Marijuana Policy Project. They're allowing 1 ounce to be completely legal. So that's correct?
That's correct. You can put anyone under either initiative would be able to possess on their person up to 1 ounce of cannabis, and that would be completely legal. As an adult over the age of 21, that would be completely legal. Okay,
so what happens if I have more than 1 ounce for the Marijuana Policy Project or the AZFMR?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the distinction that the Marijuana Policy Project's initiative makes, which is the, I believe it's called the Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol campaign.
Regulate marijuana like alcohol. Now, that's important because when I hear someone say regulate marijuana like alcohol, call me crazy, but I assume they would regulate marijuana like alcohol.
That's right. For example, if you sell alcohol without a license, it's a misdemeanor. I believe it's a Class 2 misdemeanor. You do that, though, under the MPP's Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol campaign, you're going to be charged with a felony offense.
So what happens with a felony? You get arrested.
You're arrested. You're subject to felony prosecution, possibly kept in jail the whole time. Maybe there's a bond set where you have to pay a bunch of money to get out of jail. And you're ultimately facing you're potentially facing a prison sentence, and depending on the amount involved, that prison sentence could be mandatory. So it's serious. It's very serious situation.
So let me see if I'm getting this straight. Alcohol. I need to sell it. I need to have a liquor license to sell alcohol. But if I don't have a liquor license, if I don't have a license and I sell beer, then it's a misdemeanor.
You're going to get a fine.
I'm going to get a fine.
It's possible that you might spend a little time at the local jail if you're a repeat offender, for example.
First time, though.
First time, basically, what's going to happen is you're going to get hit with a fine, and that's probably it.
So that's alcohol. Yeah. And we would want, if you're going to regulate marijuana like alcohol, to be like that.
That's what would happen.
But with the Marijuana Policy Project's initiative, what's going to happen if I'm selling a couple joints to someone?
You're going to get your door kicked in, flash grenades blowing off. Your kids are going to be taken from you. You're going to be dragged out in the middle of the night, thrown into jail, subject to felony prosecution, face possible prison time, be forced to plead guilty to a felony conviction probably, or go to trial and face the consequences there, pay everything from very large fines to attorney's fees, to defend yourself if you want to have a meaningful defense. And so, huge.
It sounds like war.
Yeah, it's war. Loss of public benefits. If you're a student, loss of financial aid, expulsion from school possibly. If you have children, they're going to be
straight up oppression.
They're going to be taken away from you. They're going to be thrown in the hands of foster parents you don't even know. I mean, crazy, like literally Nazi Germany level type of consequences for daring to engage in the unlicensed sale of a small amount of marijuana.
That sounds completely detrimental to the welfare of Arizona citizens, especially knowing that we're not going out there legalizing something like cyanide for recreational use. We're legalizing non-toxic medicinal flower buds that are healing people's diseases.
This is a substance that heals people, that has never caused anyone, never in the 5,000 years of recorded history, although we know there's probably many more thousands of years behind that, has never caused a single death. And so we're talking about a substance. Aspirin kills, I don't know how many people every year, and you can buy that over the counter.
Water kills people every year.
And certainly pharmaceutical, prescription-only drugs kill God knows how many people, depending on the particular substance. Marijuana, cannabis, 0.
So we're sitting here looking at the MPP when if you sell any marijuana under the MPP, you're getting war coming to your house.
Yeah, you have war. You have a SEAL Team 6, basically.
Let's talk about
a wannabe SEAL Team 6 dressed up in ski masks and flash grenades. We had a situation less than a year ago where flash grenades came through the window and blew half a baby's face off because it landed in the cradle
over some pot.
Over some pot. So this is serious. Like literally, like you're now in Afghanistan in urban warfare is what happens to persons who engage in the non-violent sale, patient to patient, or under the new legalization initiative, adult over the age of 21, sale to another adult over the age of 21. This is what's going to happen. This is not what Americans want. This is not what the average American or Arizona voter ever wants to see happen to any family. Yet this is what our local law enforcement and prosecutorial agencies, especially here in Maricopa County, are engaging in.
That sounds completely horrible. Now let's talk about the alternative here with Arizonans for Mindful Regulation. What kinds of things,
All right, yeah, we're talking first about amounts. Amounts, you brought that up. It's 1 ounce under both initiatives. 1 ounce is legal. Anyone can possess 1 ounce. You're immune from prosecution if you're over 21 for possessing up to an ounce. Under the MPP-sponsored initiative, it's only 5 grams of what's referred to as a marijuana extract. So if you do anything to mix the marijuana with something, spaghetti sauce, or actually like extract marijuana and use some kind of procedure to extract marijuana to have an oil, which is a more concentrated form, that you're only allowed to have 5 grams of. So under the MPP's initiative. Under the AZFMR initiative, you can have 1 ounce of flour and 1 ounce of what's commonly referred to as a concentrate. The most important part of that, though, is if you go over those amounts. If you go over 1 ounce in the in the MPP initiative, as long as it's no more than 2.5 ounces, so in other words, between 1 ounce and 2.5 ounces, it's just a petty misdemeanor. And I don't have any problem with that. I take issue, however, with once you're over 2.5 ounces, it becomes a class 6 felony offense. And we're back to flash grenades, raids, jail, prison,
Two and a half ounces,
away, all that. Yeah.
Now you want to? I was talking because some people who are sponsor the MPP follow me on Facebook. One of them, Dimitri Downing, he's sponsoring the MPP, and he was telling me that eventually, with the MPP's initiative, that an ounce will cost as little as $50. So we're sitting here looking potentially at getting flashbangs in your house for having $125 worth of weed sometime in the future under the MPP's
That's right.
jurisdiction.
And that's assuming that you're paying inflated prices, because there's no reason why that amount of marijuana should ever cost $50. But that's only under a system that is artificially restricted in competition.
Well, that's really cheap though for like right now. I'm pretty sure an ounce is several $100s right now.
An ounce. I thought you said an eighth.
Yeah, an ounce.
An ounce.
So
an ounce, $50 is pretty good for an ounce. I don't believe that our neither our medical marijuana dispensaries nor our recreational passes under either initiative. I'd
like to see an ounce.
I'd like to see it happen
for $50, but
I doubt that that's ever going to happen, because it's just, I don't think, given the overhead and so forth and taxation, that's a realistic number.
Yeah, it might not be, but if it was, I mean, we might be looking at getting that kind of warfare for $125 worth of cannabis, and like imagine spending money on a bottle of booze for $125.
Plus, you have to understand what that costs to the taxpayers, because they're paying for probably at least half a dozen law enforcement agents, plus their support back in the station, dispatch, etc. So you're talking about probably like at least 10 people being paid pretty good wages on the taxpayer dime, and then being put into jail where you are housed and fed. Which is a pretty expensive place to stay. It's actually more expensive than most resort hotels. Okay, so you're talking about in a particular raid, several $1,000s just related to the raid in the initial jail itself. Then, if that person ends up being prosecuted, you've got an attorney who would otherwise in a private industry be paid probably, what, $150, $200 an hour, who's going to be spending hours and hours and hours on the case.
So we're talking like several thousands of dollars.
Several thousands of dollars on this case that over an amount of a relatively harmless substance that's probably worth grown in someone's garden $50.
Man, it already sounds like jailbait to me. So let's talk about the AZFMR initiative. What are those thresholds looking like here?
So the AZFMR initiative also has a limit of 1 ounce of marijuana. Now, the MPP's initiative, as I said, if it's between 1 ounce and 2.5 ounces, that's just a petty misdemeanor. That's cool. Problem is, it defaults to a Class 6 felony over 2.5 ounces.
Right.
The AZFMR initiative keeps goes beyond that and keeps smaller marijuana sales, possession, misdemeanors. And so we're not going to be in a situation where under the AZFMR's initiative, people are being, raided, flash bombed, and put in jail for a marijuana, a personal use offense. As far as concentrates are concerned, under the MPP's initiative, if you possess more than just that 5 grams, immediately it defaults to a Class 4 felony under Arizona's criminal code. And you're going to be prosecuted as a felon.
So the threshold on the AZFMR initiative, it's 8 ounces? Is it straight up to 8 ounces, or does it escalate?
You mean there's 5 grams on concentrates.
I'm talking about the AZFMR initiative.
AZFMR. Sorry, yeah. So after that, it's still defelonized, and that's a sort of it's not really a word in the English language, defelonization.
Yeah, there's no spell check for it.
It's a word that we've been using for some time. I mean, I can remember going all the way back to 1996 when I testified before the District of Columbia Council, their state legislature, to prevent them from felonizing the possession of small amounts of marijuana successfully. We were able to do that successfully. And so felonization or defelonization is a word that we use in the cannabis reform movement. And it talks about which direction we're going. Are we doing what the American people and voters want us to do, the Arizona voters want us to do, which is to defelonize nonviolent marijuana offenses, or are we going along with who obviously represents special interest groups, most of our elected representatives, elected officials, who are mostly concerned about protecting interest groups who have a vested interest in keeping nonviolent marijuana offenses felonies.
So I'm going to go back real quick because I know there's like a lot of viewers out there that are thinking, well, why have any sort of criminal offense when you have marijuana possession? And it goes back to the people who paid to have their businesses and protecting those who pay their taxes. Is that correct?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I mean, fast forward to today. I mean, there's a big history to cannabis prohibition, but fast forward to today, it's not difficult to discern who is making money, lots of it, from marijuana being a Schedule I controlled substance under federal law and a felony controlled substance under Arizona law. And these range from the pharmaceutical industry. You can't patent a plant that grows in nature. So it treats a number of different conditions. This is a great threat to the pharmaceutical industry, who would like us to pay a lot of money. I had a client suffering from hepatitis C, and there are 1 out of 6 prisoners who are incarcerated. Most people in prison are in prison for nonviolent drug offenses.
Right.
Have contracted hepatitis C.
Oh my
Many
goodness.
of them after they've gone into prison, and things like tattoos and needles and things like this that go on. I mean, we can't even listen. The government can't even keep drugs out of prison. There's no way the government can ever keep drugs out of a free, open society like the United States.
Good point.
It's crazy. But the problem is that the treatment for this, it's a 12-week regimen at a cost of $1,000 a pill. So this is a crazy crazy cost for people who are being treated for hepatitis C. But this underscores, and I'm sure that the pharmaceutical company that developed the cure to hepatitis C spent a lot of money, to develop that drug, and they want to recoup that. I get that. But here's the thing. Medical marijuana, for example, can alleviate the symptoms of hepatitis C and other forms of hepatitis miraculously, literally. And I've talked to many people who have basically thought they were about to die with hepatitis B, hepatitis C, who were able, with acute forms of those viruses, who were able to feel okay from the use of medical marijuana. Pharmaceutical companies don't want you to be able to use that. They would rather you take their anti-nausea, abdominal pain type drugs, which are extremely expensive. The point I'm trying to make is they're extremely expensive, and they're not being covered by insurance, and they're not accessible by the average American. And so, but they, these pharmaceutical companies would rather we go without any form of palliative relief than to have a or be forced to purchase their products. Number one, so that's a big statement against the pharmaceutical companies. But then we've got the whole prison industrial complex. What is the prison industrial complex? The prison industrial complex was spawned by the war on drugs. Primarily, the war on drugs is against the people who consume marijuana. You look at the arrest statistics here in Arizona, the number of arrests for nonviolent marijuana-related offenses. You take every other controlled substance, put it together, they don't equal the number of arrests for nonviolent marijuana offenses. Marijuana prohibition is the war on drugs. And this war on drugs has given birth to the prison industrial complex. The prison industrial complex are not only, the for-profit prisons that we have in society today, but they are grossly inflated law enforcement agencies, prosecutorial agencies, court systems with judges and court staff, probation officers, parole officers, drug treatment centers, drug testing industries, and anybody who has an interest in marijuana being kept illegal or felonized. So anybody who is not in favor of defelonizing nonviolent marijuana crimes is now by definition part of the prison industrial complex, part of the war on drugs.
Right. That is really heavy stuff, Tom, and it's something we're fighting against. So this is what one of the things we're doing is fighting against this, and that kind of brings us to our next point. The prison industrial complex right now, privately owned here in Arizona, and the Arizonans for Mindful Regulation has something in their initiative. It's called post-conviction relief, and what it does is it allows citizens, people who have been put in prison for a marijuana-only offense, nonviolent, to apply a re-sentence under the new law. And this is something that the Marijuana Policy Project wouldn't even consider. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit on that?
That's right, and that's kind of a corollary to the AZFMR's initiative is superior to the Marijuana Policy Project sponsored initiative because it does provide for sentencing reform, meaningful reform in the area of the criminal law, exposing people to prison sentences. Okay, let's just keep it real simple. It makes it so that people who are engaged in smaller level marijuana sales and production offenses, it's still illegal. It's still criminal. It's just not felony, something that you can go over to prison over, something that's not going to rip your family apart. The MPP's initiative doesn't change any of that. The AZFMR's initiative also says that if we get this passed, and if you are currently languishing in a prison here in Arizona for a violation of Arizona's criminal marijuana code prohibition, you can petition the court. If you would not have been sentenced to prison under the AZFMR initiative, if it passes, when we pass it, you can petition the court to modify your sentence so that you can get out of jail. So if you're currently in prison on a 10-year sentence for selling a couple ounces of marijuana to another let's say patient. Let's say one patient who sold a couple of ounces of marijuana to another patient. If you're in prison for 10 years for that, you get to apply to the court to say, under this new law, the AZFMR law, I would not have been sentenced to prison and that court would then have the power to release you from prison, allow you back into free society, reunite you with your family. And
it sounds beautiful. It sounds like a really good thing. It's going to save some people's lives.
Beautiful as it gets. I mean, how much more beautiful can it be? Somebody who's able to walk out of the iron gates of prison for being wrongfully put there in the first place for a nonviolent marijuana-related
And
conduct.
the MPP just lets them rot.
The MPP just lets them rot. They make no effort whatsoever. We asked them on numerous occasions, please tell us why you won't. This is not anything that it wasn't like the last minute we said to the MPP, hey, how about this? I mean, we worked with them for several months. I personally, as an attorney, provided them with specific language that they could insert, just push and play into their initiative that would enact this meaningful reform. And they refused. They declined. When pressed over the course of several months, when pressed, they just simply said, listen, I'm sorry, we have no good answer for you. On numerous occasions, representatives from the MPP said, we have no good answer for you. On a couple of occasions, they said, well, it's never been done before. And so...
Sounds like a lame excuse to me.
And then even to the point where after the MPP filed its initiative, they had an event, a celebration in Scottsdale at a kind of a ritzy location. I attended it. And was in the audience. Rob Campia, who's the director of MPP, came in from Washington, D.C., and was there. And they invited the audience to ask questions. I was surprised that no one asked, so I finally raised my hand and said, hey, Rob, how's it going? Welcome to Arizona. Rob and I met first back in D.C. back in the 90s when I was legal director at Normal. He was had just sort of left Normal and formed the MPP. And I said, welcome to Arizona. I have a question for you. He had made the statement before the question and answer period that he was quite satisfied that everyone all the stakeholders, okay, which I think include consumers in his mind, consumers, hopeful marijuana establishments, I don't know, government, law enforcement. I'm not sure all who is in the circle of stakeholders under the MPP's view, but he said he was confident that they were all 90% satisfied with the language, the provisions in the MPP's initiative. And I said, well, Rob, it was a long question, but to summarize it really quickly, I said, I would like to believe that consumers were 90% satisfied with the initiatives, but I think that would be much easier for them if you had allowed for some meaningful sentencing reform, some meaningful defelonization of at least a mid-tier of marijuana crimes, so that we weren't still sending people to prison for nonviolent marijuana offenses, unless they were very large offenses, like cartel level offenses. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't be able to still have the option of putting them in prison, nor does the AZFMR's initiative say that they can't be put into prison. But hand to hand, like your average adult to adult personal, if you're at my house or whatever, a kind of transaction, that wouldn't be something that you could be in prison for. Or if you're at home growing plants and you go one plant over, MPP allows 6 plants. If you go 7 plants, felony prosecution. He had no answer for me, even there officially to Rob Campia. He had no answer for me. So someone else on the panel, on the stage, provided a non-responsive answer to me. So never has that question been answered. We're left to read between the lines. And to get back to my statement earlier, which was that anyone who's not in favor of defelonization and meaningful sentencing reform for nonviolent marijuana offenses is by definition a part of the war on marijuana, a part of the prison industrial complex. You're left to read between the lines. Why won't MPP put that in there, especially when we know it resonates with Arizona voters? We know that Arizona voters don't want nonviolent marijuana offenders in prison.
So we're looking at, their initiative. It has the potential keep getting people arrested. It's not letting people out of jail. And let's move forward to plant count, because a lot of people are real concerned with home grow. And what, growing your 7th plant, you said flashbangs coming in, but let's talk about the AZFMR initiative, what that's going to allow, and the protections involved there.
I mentioned, this issue of plant count. The MPP's initiative allows the cultivation of 6 plants. And if you exceed that 6 plant number, though, however, you're subject to felony prosecution. It's a mandatory felony prosecution. There's no option for misdemeanor prosecution or anything. And if the combined weight of those marijuana plants exceeds 2 pounds, then you will also be subject and facing mandatory imprisonment.
Let me ask you, is there a tier above 2 pounds that's even worse to get caught with?
Yeah, you can be caught with 4 pounds, and that raises the felony level, and it expands the range of mandatory prison time that you're facing.
Because I'm thinking 6 plants, if one plant can produce, and the weight of the plant can be 2 pounds, I mean 6 plants or 7 plants, you could have several pounds of cannabis matter, and then end up getting to that 4 pound tier pretty easily.
Very easily. I mean, one plant actually, given today's growing techniques, could easily weigh more than 2 pounds. A mature plant. If you had happen to just have 7 very small plants, tiny little seedlings, or clones, it's probably going to be under 2 plants. But in most cases, you're going to have mature plants, the combined weight of which I think will exceed 2 pounds. I think most people will agree would exceed 2 pounds, 7 plants, 7 mature plants. That person would then be facing mandatory prison under Arizona law if the MPP's initiative passes.
So legal, you're done. That's what it looks like. 6 plants, 7 plants. So what's the AZFMR looking like?
The AZFMR provides that between 1 and 99 plants, so instead of just having MPP's initiative, if you're over 6 plants, probably facing prison time. If you're under the AZFMR initiative,
it's 12 plants a person, right?
It's 12 plants a person, but you're allowed to grow up to 99 plants before you're facing felony prosecution. So it's still a crime, punishable as a crime, but as a misdemeanor if you exceed the allowable number of plants, the 12 plants.
And so what's the difference between police behavior if, they're looking for someone with felonies and then misdemeanors? Are police going to be running around trying to pursue people for misdemeanors as they do today for felonies?
Well, and that's a big, complicated question. I mean, there's a lot of federal funding that comes from the war on drugs and the arrests and the type of arrests and whether or not a person is imprisoned and so forth.
Well, I'm talking more about like the financial incentive to the state, really. Like, what is it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, there's federal money that comes raining down, depending on the level of crime that the state law enforcement agency is interdicting. Okay. So number one. Number two, in a felony scenario, you're typically going to be looking at possible property forfeiture. You're definitely going to be looking at possible prison time, if not mandatory prison time. And this is something that is, I don't know. In a misdemeanor scenario, usually what happens is Officer Friendly is knocking on your front door to let you know that someone made a complaint, or you're receiving a summons and complaint in the mail telling you that you need to be in city court for an alleged, you went over your plant
It's count. Like a civilized conversation.
It's a civilized conversation. It's a civil sort of offense. It's not the type of thing that you're going to see SWAT team type banditos busting through your front door, throwing flash grenades with assault rifles pointed at your children, and ripped out of your beds in the middle of the night, naked, thrown in the front yard, handcuffed, and go through that terrifying experience, which most people never quite recover from. Obviously, it's a very traumatic experience. It's fun for certain members of law enforcement. Lots of high fives, lots of photos being taken with, the family members as if there were antelope that have been killed in a hunt or something like this. You've seen these photos, I'm sure. Plenty of examples of them. And, this is not This is not Abu Ghraib. This is not Afghanistan. This is not Iraq. And you may object to that even in those situations. This is on American soil.
Right.
This kind of thing is happening.
Right. That's awfully disturbing. And so we're looking at, people not being attacked by our own city with the AZFMR under the same ways.
Yeah.
So one thing that
it's a disincentive to law enforcement.
Disincentive. That's the word I was looking for.
It's a disincentive to law enforcement abusing the citizens of this state and this country.
Especially in a day of the awareness of police brutality, people are getting the idea that cops, they have an incentive to go after people, and we got to take away that
That's right.
incentive.
And there's no question that's disproportionately directed toward minority groups, racial minority groups. There's no question. I've been practicing criminal defense for 22 years. I can tell you absolutely that's real. But it doesn't just happen. I can tell you, it isn't just happening to racial minorities. It happens to people, white people, people of all color, and I think that the majority of people are, quite frankly, white. It's just that still disproportionately black, in Arizona, disproportionately brown, but overall, statistically, mostly, these are white people. So it's not like, listen, if you're white and you think that this isn't going to happen to you or to happen to your family members or loved ones, you're kidding yourself.
It's going to happen. I'm white. I was arrested twice back to back when I was a kid. I was looking at graduating high school as a triple felon. And I got lucky, apparently, that I got arrested back to back. I got arrested once, then before my first court date, got arrested again. They ended up rolling it all into my first offense. But if I would have gotten arrested, then went to court, and then got arrested again, I would have been a felon. So I felt like I was lucky, but then I realized that I was a victim of the drug war, and I got angry and became an activist afterwards. But that's my story. That's a little bit of a different topic here. I kind of want to. We have two more topics to talk on before we end this. One of them is, marijuana accessories. What's going on with there? I got a smoke shop owners kind of worried about that, and we're gonna.
It's a legitimate concern.
Let's start with what the MPP says with marijuana accessories, and then go to the AZFMR.
The AZFMR is easy. It doesn't regulate businesses that are involved in the sale of marijuana.
We're talking about smoke shops.
Let me define marijuana accessories. These would be anything from equipment to grow marijuana, because remember, under both initiatives,
like hydroponics,
right? Hydroponics and pipes and other types of devices used to ingest marijuana. So under the AZFMR initiative, these are left unregulated, so that because everyone, it's just like buying wine glasses. Wine glasses or
Walmart
carafe or something like that. I mean, you're allowed. You don't have to have a special license to sell those anywhere. And if you're going to regulate marijuana like alcohol, you would expect that you wouldn't have to have a special license.
Like alcohol.
So, unfortunately, though, under the MPP's initiative, the department. And under the ACFMR's initiative, it's important to understand that currently the Medical Marijuana Act is being regulated by the Arizona Department of Health Services. If the MPP initiative passes, there'll be a new department created, and it will be regulating both the recreational use and sale of marijuana and medicinal. So AZFMR, so the MPP's initiative will do away with the AZDHS, Department of Health Services, as a regulatory agency and create this new agency. And that new agency is given the power to regulate the advertisement, marketing, and display of marijuana accessories. Meaning, obviously, that they can heavily impact the way in which these businesses are able to...
so they're sticking their fingers...
Yeah, they can say, for example, you can't how you can advertise, what kind of signage you can have, the way in which you can display your products.
It's like having Big Brother oversight.
If at all. Maybe you just have to have a catalog. That's all you can do at your store. And then you go back and you get the product that the customer selects. All of that is under the control of the department. Now, there may be constitutional battles, First Amendment, commercial free speech battles that have to be fought over this issue. Whether or not it's constitutional that the department can regulate what is otherwise free speech.
Okay, so it's going to be some legal arguments.
This is going to be the drawn out legal. Someone's going to have to put up a lot of money. But the way it's written now is the department could come in and say, listen, you can't advertise, you can't display your products, and unless you're a licensed medical marijuana establishment. That's feasibly what they could do. This would obviously heavily impact.
So the MPP is running around saying, that's probably not going to happen.
They can't. Well, no. That's fine. They can say it's probably not going to happen. They also said it's probably not going to happen that medical marijuana patients would be prosecuted for driving under the influence just for having marijuana metabolites in their system. Right?
But they were, and they do.
But they are, and they were before in front of the Supreme Court now. After the Court of Appeals said that the government can prosecute them and that they're not immune. So never mind what the MPP says about what they think the way that their initiative is going to be interpreted. All right. Look at what can happen and what is happening. What is happening now under their Medical Marijuana Act.
Fool me once, fool me twice.
What they cannot do, the department cannot prohibit the sale of marijuana accessories, but they can regulate the advertisement, marketing, and display of those, and that obviously can have an impact. There's an old saying, the power to tax is the power to destroy, which is similar to saying the power to regulate is the power to destroy. So those who are engaged in the sale of marijuana accessories should listen up and pay close attention.
If I was a smoke shop, I wouldn't even want any part of that. I mean, okay, maybe they probably can't, they might not, but they have the power to do it. So I don't even want them having that power to do it if it was my business. They're messing with my baby pretty much. So AZFMR, they can't, regulate the display of the advertisement. So that's real good. That's motivating that protection.
It's not protection. It's just saying that the free market, they're allowed to engage in the sale of products that can be used
it's safer,
by adults
at least.
over the age of 21 for the lawful cultivation or use of cannabis.
So moving forward, we're talking about number of licenses on versus and we're talking about cultivator distribution license. Can you kind of elaborate on the differences between the two initiatives before you end this segment?
Yeah, and I think this is an important point because under the MPP's initiative, it's tied always. It's going to forever be tied to 10% of the retail liquor licenses, which right now in Arizona is around 1,600. So, in other words, 160 total licenses, which is barely more than the number of medical marijuana dispensary licenses that are currently available, which is around 100, close to about 130. Plus, local jurisdictions can outlaw marijuana establishments, except unless you're an existing dispensary. So what that means is we're probably going to end up with about as many retail recreational outlets as we have medical marijuana dispensaries under the initiative. Yet the population of consumers is going to go from 80,000 registered patients today to, I don't know how many million, it's like over 3 million, obviously, adults over the age of 21, a population in Arizona overnight. So we're already having problems with dispensary meeting supply for 80,000 people. What about that same number of retail licenses meeting the demand for several million people?
And they're going to be going to the black market because...
Of course, the black market is obviously going to step in like it does in free societies to meet that demand for supply. And that's why we're going to definitely see, I think, an increase in criminal prosecutions for the unlicensed sale and cultivation of cannabis.
So with all these things that you've listed down, to me, as a consumer, it looks like there's prohibition, and the MPP is pouring gasoline on it.
And by the way, let me just say, under the AZFMR initiative, they seek parity with the number of retail liquor licenses. So, as I said, it's around 1,600. Mm-hmm. The MPP's initiative limits it to 10% of that number, or 160. AZFMR simply has parity. So if anyone's regulating marijuana like alcohol, it's the AZFMR who allows for the same number of licenses. So you've got 1,600 statewide. This is going to make it very difficult, I think, with that number of retail outlets for the black market to continue to compete. That's going to cause a lot more of competition, better grade product, lower prices, and squeeze out, to a large extent, I think, the ability of the black market to function. Versus under the MPP's initiative, there's no question we're going to create a huge black market problem here in Arizona.
Well, that's why we need a lot of help. We need a lot of assistance pushing the AZFMR initiative. And you can help us out at azfmr.com. You can make a campaign contribution there. So what it looks like here, to me, is we have the MPP's initiative, and that says regulate marijuana like alcohol. But in fact, they're regulating it as if it's much more dangerous than alcohol, nothing even close to alcohol. And what's going to actually get people to not be arrested for their marijuana possession and not have these flashbangs coming through people's windows for that consumer level stuff is the AZFMR initiative. So what we recommend for you guys to do is to look for yourselves. We have a comparison chart at azfmr.com. It lists all the categories one by one, compares the two initiatives side by side so you can see for yourselves. And you're going to understand that we need the AZFMR initiative. So like I said, please check out azfmr.com, make a campaign contribution. You can volunteer there. You could also volunteer at SaferArizona.com. Before we end this segment, do you have anything else you'd like for the viewers to hear you think might be important?
I think we covered most of the important parts. I just really appreciate the people that did watch this, to take the time to listen through this. It's an important topic. We expect that we will be successful in getting the AZFMR initiative on the ballot. It's going to take funding so that we can collect the signatures. 150,000 we need to get by June, and that's not an easy number. When you break that down to a daily statistic, you can see that it's quite a project. The MPP's initiative is already, it's been out there longer. They've got a good chunk of those signatures already knocked down. We've got some catch up to play, and I fully expect and intend that the AZFMR initiative ends up on the ballot, but we can't do that without a lot of help. If that doesn't happen and the MPP's initiative is the only initiative on the ballot, then perhaps we'll be having a different conversation, a wholly different macroeconomic conversation about the future of legalization in America. But I'm hopeful that that future is not going to be owned and controlled by a small handful of corporate interests, but rather that future will be determined by the people that those initiatives ought to be all about, which are the cannabis consumers around the country and here in Arizona.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Tom, for coming on the Safer Dave Show, and hope to have you on again sometime.
You bet, man, anytime.
And we're going to end this. Thank you all for watching. Again, that was azfmr.com.
Thanks.